There you go.
That's it. So, right, sorry about that. That start. I don't know why suddenly Zoom is. Could it be because it's someone else's Zoom meeting? I have no idea, but never had that problem before. So I'm starting with what. Firstly, it's really great to be here with you all, and thank you very much, Ian and colleagues, for inviting us. We're really looking forward to the DINLab. And we hope we'll see many of you there. The reason we're looking forward to it is that we are convinced that there is a great deal that social housing organizations can learn from the Buurtzorg experience. But we are also ourselves new to the social housing environment. And although we have been working in the last year with the Social Housing Association, New Tide Homes, part of the flagship group, and therefore learning a lot about the environment from that experience. So we're not starting from a completely standing still start. Nevertheless, what we intend is that the DINLab will be a process of learning in which we will together explore not just the background of Buurtzorg, the principles and practices that have made Buurtzorg successful, but also together create an understanding of the extent to which, and if so, how, this can be useful in your contexts. So we're seeing it very much as a joint learning exercise. And I started off the presentation with this quote, which is very up to date, because just yesterday, Jos de Blok, who is the founder of Buurtzorg, which was founded in 2006, was at the World Economic Forum, where he is one of the 2022 Social Innovators of the Year. And the quote that you see there is from the Schwab Foundation's nomination of Jos for that award. And it's one of many that Buurtzorg has garnered over the 15 years in which it's grown from a startup of 4 nurses to the leading provider of health and social care, and an inspiration for many other organizations, not only in health and social care, but beyond internationally. Next slide, please, Ali. Going to sound like that guy on telly, aren't I? So what's different about Buurtzorg, and I think this is where we get into thinking about what is relevant for your context, is that Buurtzorg doesn't define its purpose as to provide care services, or indeed to provide any inputs at all. It defines its purpose as being to support people to live healthy and autonomous lives with purpose and with warm social interaction. Next, please. And to do that, it's all about building trust-based relationships rather than having a pre-planned set of tasks, but enabling and supporting its professionals who are trained for their jobs and therefore have a basis to be trusted in building the kind of trust-based relationships that they need with the people that they support to enable them, as I say, to live healthy and autonomous lives with purpose and warm social interaction. Next, please, Ali. And it's based, all of that's based on 4 core beliefs, which are set out there. And everything that we do in Buurtzorg, from the nature of the relationship between the professional and the person needing support, a person that Buurtzorg refers to as a client, all of that, from that relationship right through to the way in which the back office is organized to support the professionals in enabling them to do their jobs, is based on those 4 core beliefs. Thanks, Ali. And the practice is driven by 3 simple principles. Firstly, and these sound really obvious, but if you think about the way organizations function, you'll know that sometimes the obvious is exactly what doesn't happen in an organization. So firstly, doing what is needed and what isn't. We do a lot of work in the National Health Service. We come across a lot of time and energy being spent on what isn't needed, which is taking attention, energy, and time away for frontline professionals from what is needed to be done. Secondly, rethinking. In other words, all the time trying out different ways of solving problems, seeing how they work, keeping on doing and building on what's working well and changing what isn't. And that principle is, again, built into the daily practice of the professionals, but also the way in which the teams as a whole evaluate their experience in looking after the people that they support. That's it, thanks. And finally, common sensing. In other words, our teams are usually composed of very of graduate nurses, registered nurses who've had a vocational training, and nurse assistants. But very often, the solutions that they're finding for the people that they're supporting are coming out not just out of the clinical training that nurses have had, but the life experience that all of the people in the teams have had about solving particular problems. So for us, enabling people to operate at work using the same sorts of mindsets that they have at home in many respects, I'll give you an example. I was working with a group of nurses and healthcare assistants. We were talking about who was going to do what in the distribution of various organizational and administrative tasks in the team. And the healthcare assistant, one of the healthcare assistants said she didn't think she had any of the skills and qualifications to do something that was useful for the organization of the team. So we got talking about how she ran her household. And of course, she did run her household. And so many of the, often the hierarchies that we have at work are denying the everyday experience that actually can be very useful for non-hierarchical self-managed teams. Thanks very much, Ali. So Buurtzorg starts with the person needing support. And this onion model that we use illustrates how starting with the person needing support and then thinking about, next one please, Ali, the resources that person has. Our approach is always not starting with what's wrong. Often the problem that needs to be solved is dealing with what's wrong, but starting in solving it with what's strong. And that means not only the potential, the actual and potential assets of the person needing support themselves, but also the social assets around them in their family, amongst their neighbors, and in their communities. And we'll get on to explore in the DINLab how those sorts of principles can translate into the social housing sector. But I think when you think about social housing, not only as provision of homes, but also the development of communities, that can become a very significant. And when you also think about what we've learned in the work we've done so far in social housing, how some customers or tenants, however you refer to the people that you work with, may present with all sorts of problems that actually that might be solvable themselves with some support, rather than being over-reliant on landlords and things. So I don't know how these sorts of principles might translate into your setting, but I think it would be very interesting to explore it. Next one, please, Ali. Around that is the nurse. If you're going to work in that person-centered way and in a very creative way to enable people and the people around them to come up with solutions and support each other, you can't operate on the basis of telling people exactly how to do their jobs. Buurtzorg nurses and teams work within a framework in which they self-manage in a non-hierarchical way and support each other and challenge each other to do great work and share out the organizational and administrative responsibilities that are best done at the team level. And the teams also, next one please, Ali, also support their clients by coordinating with the wider system. And I don't know to what extent your housing officers have an important role in linking with other other agencies within their communities. But for us in Buurtzorg, having somebody that is able to coordinate in conjunction with the people that they're supporting with the wider system is very important. Next one, please, Ali. As I said, Buurtzorg started in 2006. It started because Jos de Blok and 3 friends had tired of trying to bring about the change that they knew was needed within an existing organization. And I mention that because that's, of course, the challenge that we're discussing in the DINLab and that we've encountered a lot in the work that we've been doing in Britain over the last 5 years. And so started their own venture based on the principles that I've just been exploring. And it's grown organically since then, from 1 team in 2006 to now there's more than 900 teams with more than 10,000 nurses and nurse assistants employed in them. Plus, Buurtzorg has grown of half a dozen smaller organizations, including a fast-growing one in home help, and has become the leading provider of health and care in the Netherlands. And it's done that not only because of the great care quality that it's produced, but also, on we go, Ali, because of the its ability, because of its success in recruiting and retaining a workforce with much lower turnover. I don't think you would want it to be much lower than 4%. Actually, it's probably, if you get get a bit stale if it's too much lower than that. But you also don't want it as high as it is. For example, I was talking to a social care organization yesterday where the turnover is about 30% per year, and that's pretty typical in social care. So Buurtzorg has been able to manage that very well, but neither that benefit nor the great quality would have been sustained if it weren't for the fact that Buurtzorg's also been able to do this with increasingly healthy finances. Indeed, just last week, Buurtzorg announced that it's going to upgrade all of its nurses and nurse assistants by 1 step on the nationally negotiated collective bargaining agreement, because of its ability, because it has succeeded, including through COVID, in becoming more productive. And by being more productive, what Buurtzorg means is that the number of hours of professional input on average per client that is needed to get the results that are needed has declined by half. And that's because of its approach to supporting the self-management of care by people with professional inputs where it's needed, but also enabling people to learn to look after themselves more effectively, if you like, becoming health coaches for the people that they're supporting and the people around them. And that's of course led to significant financial savings, which have been added to by the very low margins that result from having staff of about 15,000 now in the total Buurtzorg family, with a back office of 50 or 60 people. On we go, Ali. So to come to the program itself against that background, and of course in the program we'll learn a bit more in more detail about Buurtzorg. We think it's very important whenever we're introducing the Buurtzorg way in contexts outside the Netherlands or outside health and social care, to contextualize it in that context so that you can understand how the way things are done in Buurtzorg relate to that context. So it's important. Sometimes we used to take study visits to the Netherlands of organizations that wanted to learn from Buurtzorg, and we came back and realized that in many cases what they were doing was trying to copy some of the practices of Buurtzorg without really understanding and grappling with what lay behind those practices in that context. And what we try to get across in the work that we do, the learning and development work we do, is to really grasp what's behind the practices, how they relate to achieving purpose in accordance with the principles and values of Buurtzorg, and and the practices that arise from that may or may not be the same in different contexts. So we start always from exploring the purpose of particular organizations, the extent to which the organizational purpose is shared across the organization and understood, and introducing the logic of the model, right from that initial cell that I mentioned in looking at the onion model, if you like. I see it as a sort of cell of the thing, the relationship between the professional and the person that the professional is supporting, right through to how the back office supports the professionals themselves. The second session will look more at one of the biggest worries that people have in moving towards self-managed organization, which is the idea that, oh my God, we're going to lose control. And basically what we have found is that actually, if you create an organizational environment in which people within a clear framework, and that is very important, Buurtzorg doesn't have a lot of rules, but it does have a clear framework which defines norms and standards in terms of the great care quality, the nature of working relationships within the organization, and the expectations of productive resource use to enable the organization to be sustainable. That framework is very simple, can be written on a couple of sides of A4. And we do find when we're working with new organizations new to this, that it is important to be explicit about it, to begin with at least. Of course, they're by now embedded in Buurtzorg's norms, so nobody refers to it very much. But that framework is important in defining the boundaries of self-management and creating an organizational environment overall so that the shared purpose and standards and norms are very clear. But within that, teams in their different contexts, whether they be urban or rural or whatever, are able to come up with their own solutions. So in that way, actually, accountability and control and transparency are enhanced. We'll go on to look at what that means for leadership and support to the teams in the third session, because we often find that of course, in any transformation like this, you run into problems, you hit obstacles, you have challenges, you have unforeseen events. Some of the risks that you know you are taking manifest themselves. And at that point, the ability of leadership to really explore that with the whole organization is very important. Buurtzorg has never had a policy document in its life, but what they do regularly, both from Josta Block as chief executive and from all of the teams, is to share experience and put it onto their intranet, which is a very important, at scale, it's a very important part of Buurtzorg's ability to self-manage across a large organization, to be able to put experience online and enable everybody to learn from it. The fourth session will look getting down to really important details about how you maintain not only great service and happy and working relationships, but also efficient resource use. One of the catchphrases in Buurtzorg is first coffee, then care. What that means is you start by building a relationship and design a care package jointly between the professional and the client. And we have found in Britain that introducing that idea is very important, but also it's important to embed in the everyday practice of professionals the practice of thinking seriously about how to enable the clients to be more independent and less reliant on professional support. And that's how Buurtzorg has managed to increase, to reduce the number of hours of professional input per client that I mentioned earlier. Now, in your context, of course, we'll find out what that means. But whilst we know that focusing on the care, on the relationship between the professionals and the people they're supporting, and on the one hand, and on the relationships between enabling and supporting the self-management of the professionals is exactly where leadership focus needs to be, rather than on cost reduction. we also think it's vital that in the everyday practice of the professionals themselves, that there is a high level of awareness about how resources are being used and how they could be used more effectively. So that's, again, one of the worries that many organizations have is if you create this environment of self-management, will it lead to lots of resource waste? We find, on the contrary, it leads to much better use of resources if you do it well. And then finally, the fifth session will look at what all of this means for enabling an existing organization to transform. And my goodness, we've learned a lot about what that involves over the last 5 years of our work in Britain. The challenges organizationally, the challenges for leadership, the challenges systemically in some environments, possibly including yours because of the regulatory environment, but also but also we've learned a lot about how those challenges can be tackled. And I'm pleased to say that we've worked with about 40 organizations now around Britain and Ireland. We've had some really successful and promising pilot projects, as you might call them, or tests and learns or pioneering projects. And sometimes we've been frustrated by not moving beyond that. But we're increasingly finding those solutions together with the organizations that we're working with. And some of them are now getting to scale in really interesting ways. But when I say getting to scale, not because they're being driven, but because the leadership of those organizations have really grasped and understood what kind of leadership is needed for an organization of this type and have been very consistent about their behaviors in that respect. So those two will be able to bring in some experience from some of the organizations that we've worked with that I think can help with the nature of the transformation that you're trying to make. Next one, please, and last one indeed, Ali. So these are what you think you will get from the DINLab, and I won't go through them. And I think I've covered most of those. In the social housing context, we're particularly interested to explore with you the extent to which you see your roles as, on the one hand, providing housing and doing that very well, but also particularly in the developing context of place-based development, of community of community power, of the necessity for different agencies, both public and third sector and indeed private sector agencies, to work together in places, and what all of that means. We're anticipating that aspect of the Buurtzorg way we're working increasingly closely with around asset-based community development in Buurtzorg and Britain, because we see that in many ways as the other side of the same coin of what we do in public service organizations. And we think this might be particularly pertinent to your situation, but we shall see. That's up to you. But we'll explore all the various building blocks and the logic of the model, and how we can how you, if you want to, can make this work in your context. And I just finish with that. One of the other awards that Jos has won in the recent past has been from the Peter Drucker Forum. I particularly like this citation because it's true. Very good, very solid brand without a marketing function. No chief financial officer, but always profitable. Not highly profitable, but profitable enough to keep going and to manage risk financially. And without an HR department, it has some HR advisors, of course, as every organization needs to make sure they're up to date with the law and regulation of a whole number of things, including HR, but nevertheless creates an environment for good working practices. And as I say, been awarded Best Place to Work 5 times. Last slide, please, Ali. Essentially, the Buurtzorg way is all about humanity over bureaucracy and keeping things simple. And I like that quotation from Jos that I'm finishing with, because it's more and more, the more work we do, that's what we find. start from the perspective of the people you're there to serve and your purpose in serving them, and simplifying the systems. We live in a highly complex world. The services that you provide are complex services. And perhaps for that reason, organizations tackling these complex challenges have become more and more complicated. We find that actually the paradox is that to tackle these complex challenges, we need to be as simple and simplify the systems as much as we can. And we hope that that will come. We know, in fact, it will come across to you in the DINLab. So I've gone on a bit too long, Ian. Apologies for that, but I'll close it there.
No, that was absolutely excellent. And I think you told the story exceptionally well in terms of not just Buurtzorg, but what people will experience who want to sort of come on the lab there, Brendan. So thank you very much for that. I mean, it always hits to me, and the size and scale and how quickly the Buurtzorg business has been built, and that point about 50 back office staff for a 10,000 person organization is unheard of there. But I also like that the final finishing quote there. That could have been written for the social housing sector. We've lived people with complex needs. We've got a lot of service to provide. We've got challenges facing what we do. So hopefully this will have garnered some interest with colleagues, and I think so. We've had some questions posted. I'm going to just basically go straight in with yourself and with Ali as well, if she wants to join in terms of just answering members' questions around this. So I'll just go through, and if usual thing, if people are okay, we'll just bring you up on screen. So I'm going to just work from the bottom up. So Julia Mixter, do you want to just put your mic and camera on and just ask your question?
Yeah, hopefully my camera is on, and Mike. Yeah, it's an observation in terms of what we're going to get from the DINLab more than perhaps a question to be answered right now. But the one thing I've been interested in looking at Buurtzorg is sort of the heavy hand of regulation, both from the housing regulator and sort of financial regulation, and how the self-management and that sit alongside each other. Because I totally understand that there's sort of governance and framework within Buurtzorg, but sometimes you sort of think about the amount of data and reporting that we're expected to do in housing, and the feeling that is getting ever heavier in terms of sort of evidence basis and stuff, and how you manage that without having a sort of big set of back office functions who are churning all of that information out. So observation perhaps more than question, but I'm really interested in understanding a bit more about that.
We certainly will cover that, Julie, and as you say, can't go into much detail here, but what I will say is that an absolutely central part of the back office's function in Buurtzorg is, on the one hand, to be alert to and respond to the needs of the changing regulatory environment. And because of Buurtzorg's success and growth, to some extent, the regulatory environment has changed in the Netherlands, but only to be honest, quite a small extent. Some of the things have changed and are more suited now to the Buurtzorg way of working, but others haven't. And there's currently a government in the Netherlands which is actually has a very different kind of mindset, and Buurtzorg's sort of in battle with it all the time about new regulations that they're bringing in. But they're not voluntary regulations. They've got to be complied with. So a very important part of the Buurtzorg back office's role is to find ways to support, to simplify what is required of the teams, so that the back office gets all of the data they need from the teams to be able to respond to the regulatory requirements with minimum disturbance to the everyday work of the professionals themselves. And that's a real art, and it's something that they've developed over many years. Part of it is through the IT system, so that what they tend to do is they try things out with probably half a dozen teams to test out ways of dealing with a new regulatory requirement and see how that works, and test it out with a few teams, and then find, when they've got it as right as they think they can get it, they change the IT system or whatever other reporting requirement is needed. But the touchstone is always, how can we do this as simply as possible so that we protect everybody from the regulatory risks on the one hand, and minimize the disturbance to the everyday practice of the professionals on the other hand. And they've become pretty good at it.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Gizemolna, do you want to sort of, you're asking, I suppose, about the recruitment side. Do you want to ask your question, sir?
Yes, thank you very much. So actually, I'm coming from business. I'm a project manager, and mostly I work with IT teams. And that was the reason I joined, because in IT, this agile way of, the agile approach is very hot topic, and I was interested how it works in other sectors. And just to give a tip for the previous topic, that it's a good idea maybe to find an IT team who works in a so-called agile way and work together with them, because they will help a lot. Nowadays, reporting can be done automatically quite well. So getting to my question, so I am really interested, how do you recruit? Is it like through advertisement, or is it more like through your colleagues, that they recommend new colleagues, and that's how you attract new workforce or new members of the teams? It is very important for me because we struggle currently with the situation where we would like to improve our work to a certain direction, but the recruitment still delivers people with a different mindset.
Okay, right. Brendan, so recruitment, onboarding, how does that work from a Buurtzorg perspective?
So thanks for that question. So the teams are responsible for their own recruitment. There are a few rules in Buurtzorg. One of them is that teams, when they get to 12 in size, need to divide into 2 teams. So typically a team is building up from 4, 5, 6 members towards 12 as it grows its caseload and as it grows in its size. And the teams themselves are responsible for their own recruitment, within, of course, guidelines which are informed by employment law, good HR practice, and so on. So the teams advertise if they need to, or they put the word out when they need to. A typical way of recruiting in Buurtzorg would be quite informal. One or more, 2 or 3 members of a team will meet with a prospective new member of a team and explore that with them. And once the team has decided that it favors somebody to join the team, then there is, of course, a formal process, which is done more formally between the new member of staff and the back office, for all the usual things you'd expect, checking references and all of that sort of stuff. And once that's completed, there is an onboarding process. That will either be done within the team, or when a team has got a lot of new recruits, typically there will be a couple of weeks in which they're able to attend some learning and development workshops that Buurtzorg does at a national level. So it will vary, and it will vary depending on the needs of the team. But yeah, the onboarding will be a couple of weeks working with the team. And one of the several organizational roles that are divided within teams amongst team members and are normally rotated around the team is that of the mentor. And the role of the mentor is to support the arrival of new members of teams, and also to support students. Most teams at any one time will have a student nurse working with them. Buurtzorg regards its responsibilities to the next generation of nurses in this respect very seriously, so very much encourages teams to have a student with them. So the mentor will have that particular role, but the whole of the team, that just is for that particular period. So there is a formal part of it at national level, but also a the team is responsible. In our context in Britain, many people would worry, well, does that mean that you get sort of what's known as homophilia in recruitment? In other words, just recruiting people who are just like you. And of course, there is always that risk that you then get reduced diversity in teams. How does Buurtzorg tackle that in the same way as it tackles any other challenge of this kind, which is to have a conversation about it, to be open about these risks, to be open about the benefits of diversity in all of the meanings of that term, and to encourage that sort of mindset? We believe that's the best way to do that, is that the teams need to be comfortable with the people that they're recruiting, but they also need to do that in a way that encourages diversity. So we like that about all of our policies.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, Stephen Hall, you had an interesting question there. Do you want to ask yours?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Thanks, Brendan. So, as I said, for me, it really resonates with me because this is the direction of travel that the organisation is going. And I think we recognise the mountain that we've got to climb. You talked about people releasing control. And for me, the question is similar to Julia's, but probably from a different perspective. So in a regulated environment, for me, decision-making is probably the biggest risk. I'd be interested in how Buurtzorg manages decision-making. I've learned quite a lot about sociocracy. I'm just interested in whether it's a similar kind of model where the principle there is everyone has a voice, everyone has a choice. So, it's really similar. It sounds really similar to sociocracy. So I'd just be interested to hear a little bit more about how decision-making is made.
Oh, thanks, Stephen. I think some of the underlying principles, of course, are similar to sociocracy. I think the methodologies are quite different, however. First of all, in terms of the framework that Buurtzorg teams self-manage within, that framework defines the boundaries of amongst other things, that framework defines the boundaries of their authority. So just to give you an example, if Buurtzorg teams have to be available 24/7. It doesn't mean to say people are working 24/7, obviously not. It doesn't mean indeed that anybody is working overnight, but it does mean that at any one time you can be reached on the telephone, and that's a non-negotiable. Another one is that although Buurtzorg teams organize their own rotas to suit their own circumstances in terms of the people that they're supporting and the circumstances of the team members themselves, some of whom will know that have young kids and other people, older relatives that they're looking after. So all of these things have to be borne in mind. So it's best that the team is able to do that. On the other hand, they do that within a framework which says you can't cherry pick clients to suit when you want to work. So you have to take on clients on the basis of their needs and meet their needs. So that, if you like, that what once might have been called a tight, loose sort of relationship, the tightness of the framework is important, and flexibility and ability to self-manage within that is very important. So they're both parts of that. Within the teams, we have a methodology which we call solution-focused interaction, which we know that it's important that the whole of a team takes ownership of decisions that teams make. That therefore we don't encourage majority voting, because we find that what happens with that is that those who are not in favour of a decision don't really contribute to trying to make a success of it. For us, what's important is that the whole team arrives at a decision about what it's going to do. If it's obviously some decisions are for individual professionals to make in their practice, but when the whole team needs to make a decision, that it arrives at that decision together and tests it out together. And that means that everybody has to be comfortable with it. But that also means that you need to set the bar fairly low in terms of trying things out. So what we always say is, can you, rather than be paralyzed by inaction and by failing to reach a decision that everybody's over the moon about. It's important to arrive at a decision as quickly as you can that everybody can live with and agree to try and make work, and then test it out and come back to it in a month or so. So the balance between participatory and consensual decision making and action orientation is for us very important. And for that, it's important that we keep focused on trying things out, learning them, never expecting to have the finished article. I hope that helps, but we'll go into that in a lot more detail in the dinner.
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much for your question, Steve. I'm going to bring Helena Moore in now as well, because Kate Waring's asked a really interesting question, because I think what we need to sort of share with you now is how the lab will work in practice, some of the issues around timescales, when we're looking to sort of start that, and I think we probably need to sort of cover off the questions about what sort of team you would need to pull together to get the best out of this lab. So Helena, do you want to sort of share with colleagues how the lab's going to work?
So it's a question that Ali and I have and Brendan have talked about, is what would be the right combination for an organisation. And I think what we arrived at was really having a senior level sponsor, because, and that's from experience with other labs, if we really want to test this in the sector and in an individual organisation, we need senior level sponsorship. That person doesn't need to come to every session, but the kick-off and the one-to-one and the mop-up session at the end, I think that sponsor would be useful for. Then a lead, so a lead from the organisation that would report into the sponsor or on the project. And then with this particular project, one of the things we talked about was actually having 1, 2, 3, maybe operational people who are actually doing the roles that we're testing would be absolutely valuable. So currently that's our thinking on the right sort of size of engagement for the lab from an organisation. So a sponsor who doesn't need to come to everything, a lead who is the core person, and then some operational support people as well around that. We record the sessions, so if people can't attend, they can. Obviously, it's great to be there for the core sessions, but if people can't for whatever reason, or you want to share it more widely with someone else outside of that team, then we do record the sessions as well, so they can be shared. And we also have we'll set up a Teams group as well, so that we can share materials, context, experience, because I think one of the things with the lab that's really come out strongly from participants is that peer-to-peer sharing and going on the journey together. So we'll make sure that there's plenty of that involved as well. So yeah, that's the sort of team and the makeup.
And in terms of sort of start dates, when are we looking to start this, and what sort of period is it going to run over?
In March is the kickoff, and we would start our one-to-one sessions in March. We'd set up the Teams group before then, and we would put out materials before then. But if we can get people signed up, we'll kick off in March. And then over a 20-week period, so we'll have the one-to-ones, we'll have 5 sessions, as Brendan alluded to in his presentation. We'll do a closure session to reflect on the findings for those that have been involved, and then we'd follow that up as well with an open session to all our members and sometimes beyond in the sector that are interested in hearing from the people that have been on the experiment to find out more. So it's 20 weeks, Ian, really.
And are there any particular service areas within housing organisations that we think this might work best for? Are there any particular areas that we want to sort of focus on? Because obviously housing is a big business around this. Is there any particular organisational teams that we would like to try and get?
I think that's a good one, and Ali and Brendan might have a view on this as well, but certainly we've talked about frontline housing teams as being a discrete group that would help, but here that there might be other teams that people could think of where it might be a good place to start, but that was where our initial thinking had gone.
Yeah, Brendan, Ali, do you have any views in terms of, because obviously you've done some work with some social housing organisations, are there any particular service areas?
Ali, do you want to go or shall I?
No, fine for you, thank you.
All right. I don't know enough. I mean, what I've learned the little I know about social housing, I know that you organise differently. So in fact, the organisation we've been working with has just moved to a work stream approach to organising itself, having had a patch-based approach before, whereas another one that we hope to begin work with soon is done the exact opposite. Has just moved to a patch-based from a thematic division of work teams. So I mean, clearly that tells you I know a little bit about how you organise, but also that it's quite variable. Echoing what Helen has said, the work, I would say, two crucial groups if you're going to make a success of this are the leadership of the organization, for very obvious reasons, and the people who are at the so-called front line of your service, who are going to be the ones who are self-managing, whether in a thematic team or in a patch-based team. I'm not, it's obviously a challenge how you would, if you were, for example, going to have half a dozen people taking part in the DINLab, how you might select on that basis. But one possibility might be to make sure that there are people with authority at a very senior level, with the support of the sponsor, obviously. People who are particularly enthusiastic, perhaps, in their teams. We find that if you're going to make a transformation like this, you need to start where the energy is for it. That's probably the same with any change program, but start where the energy is. We tend to find that in the workforces that we deal with, they break down into three categories broadly, not necessarily numerically equal categories, usually not, in fact. There are those who say, oh, this is exactly how I want to work. When can I start? Let me at it. And they're the pioneers, and that is where to start. There are those who say, I'm going to watch this with interest, but I'm not going to be in the front line of it. And if you like, those pioneers become ambassadors for change with that second group. And there are those who will not respond well to it and who will not want to do it. And you've got to face that. But if you start with them, you'll never get anywhere. So I would say, you know, if there are people in your organization that you know might be people who would be the nucleus of some of your pioneer teams, having 2 or 3 of them involved would be good. Having somebody at a very senior level that can make things happen and take responsibility for organizational change, important too. The back office supports in this are also very important. So it may well be essential to, or at least desirable, to have somebody, say, from a finance background or from an HR background that can get introduced and start to learn about what kind of changes to the organizational and administrative support systems in the organization are likely to be required. And this might sound an odd thing to say, but in those cases, I would say go for somebody who's a bit skeptical, who asks awkward questions, who says things like, you know what, that won't work in our system because. And we would be hoping that what that person might be able to learn is actually there are organizational solutions to some of these challenges. And we don't have to let the organized structural inertia get in the way of the change that's required. But in that case, you know, it can be useful for, we've found, to engage with people who are quite skeptical about it and have their doubts at that sort of middle management, back office support level, because they are in the end going to be quite crucial, can be quite significant obstacles, but also can be supported to come up with some of the back office solutions. So I hope that helps. I think that's the kind of balance that would be useful to have.
And as I said at the outset, this is an experiment. You are not going to get, and will be, if it's not being made clear, you're not going to get the full Buurtzorg intervention here. This is something to allow you to test and see whether it is right for your organizational culture and the timing of this. So what we would expect is that organizations go on this journey. Not everybody would decide, actually, we want to go from this, but there may be some of the participants who say, actually, yeah, this is right for us now. We want to go full on this and scale this up across the organisation. So this is a great way, I suppose, to look at a change, transformation, call it what you like, programme, and do so in a much better position of knowledge of whether this is going to increase the chances of success for you. So hopefully that'll answer Steve Key's question that he's just posted up there. So as I say, the prospectus that we'll send out to you will be very clear about what the lab will do, and more importantly, what the lab won't cover in the time that we've got available. We're not going to totally change your organization in 20 weeks. What we might do is change some of the organizational mindset to make you more curious and more open to the Buurtzorg approach. And of course, those participating in it are going to get some real good skills and insights, which again will stay with them and the organizations as well. We would like to try and get a mix of organizations. We can take up to a maximum of 6 on this lab. That we tend to find that's probably the sweet spot for, as Helena calls it, that peer-to-peer learning. But also it gives us some good problems. We would like both a geographical mix and an organizational type mix. And to make it sort of accessible as well, we are going to make one spot available for some of the smaller organizations at a reduced cost, just so that everybody has a chance to sort of participate within this as well. I'm just conscious of the time. Are there any other sort of final questions that people sort of want to ask that we haven't covered, or any issues or burning questions that you would have expected us to sort of cover around this? Like I say, there will be quite a bit of due diligence that goes into this when you sign up, the one-to-ones before you start, that you'll be having a conversation with the Buurtzorg team around your organization as well, just so that we can cover off and increase the chances of success around this as well. So you're not just going to be suddenly sort of dropped into this as well. I've just seen there's a question come through from Emma Collins. Do you want to come on and ask your question, Emma?
Not so much a question, really just more of an observation, because it's been something that we've been talking about quite a lot in terms of our teams are part of the business in Curo. We kind of have separate parts of the business, so to speak, and the part that I work for is commissioned support services for some of our most complex customers. And we've been talking a lot about how our teams kind of self-manage within the remits of their commissioned contracts, and trying to kind of look at that hierarchical approach as we go through like that element. So it just seems to fit quite nicely with obviously our part of the business, really.
Yeah, and it would be good to sort of, get that sort of supported housing sort of element in as one of the labs. But again, we're also open to other teams that might be working out in the field, some of the field operatives and some of the other areas as well. Helena, a question from Andrew Kids for yourself about how to get on the lab.
Yeah, obviously I'm open to bribes. It'll be important to get the people that it fits with, Andrew. So yeah, but to a degree it is first come first served, partly because we need to secure the time and make sure that we've planned for that. So yeah, the sooner the better that you let us know if you're interested. We can talk that through and get you signed up. That would be great. But happy to have some further conversations, and Ali and I are in regular touch. If you want to talk anything through, Andrew, if you've got any questions around it, give us a shout.
Sure, yeah, there's a couple of colleagues that were hoping to get on this call but couldn't make it this morning, so I'm going to have to take information back. So that's useful. Thanks, Alina. I might be in touch. Thanks.
Okay,
Great.
so what we'll do now is finish the session here, send around the recording. You'll also get emailed the prospectus, which will give you more details, how to join the lab. Applications are open now, and they will be open for a few weeks to get everybody sort of signed up. As I say, I think we need a minimum of about 3 or 4 organizations to make this lab run, and a maximum of 6 organizations as well. So hopefully you found that of interest. As I say, we would love to sort of get this lab up and running, and then share the findings and see how Buurtzorg could transfer within the social housing. So if I could just thank Brendan and Ali for coming along and giving such a really good pitch today, and we will be in touch and hopefully, as I say, have a really interesting lab for the housing sector as well. Okay, guys, thanks again for giving the time up, and hopefully see you at a future DIN session. Take care.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ian.
Okay.
Bye.